right, welcome back to the show. Back on is Patrick, Huzzo Pat, a guy who, I said this last time, knows more ball than 99% of the world. So massive praise.
That's just because I'm old.
Yeah. All right, so the talk about Fields can basically go on for days, dude.
Yep.
Tua, though, is another interesting and very important conversation to be had. So I'll start out with this. As a diehard Fins fan, and I speak for all Fins fans here, even if you're the biggest Tua guy, paying him 50 million per year does not sound good. To any football fan in the world, that should be a red flag. So when free agency began, I was worried. We lost Hunt. We didn't re-sign Christian Wilkins. Um, Connor Williams, who's the best center in football right now, we didn't re-sign to. I thought that was a sign we are giving him 50 to 60 million. We're clearing cap space to re-sign him.
Right.
Thankfully, I was wrong.
Right.
We retooled in a very real way. Um, Signed Jordan Brooks.
Sorry, my dog is attacking me. She wants into my lap. Okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah, dogs are
Okay.
always good, man. Everyone loves puppies, right?
Say hi, Maddie.
Um,
Yeah, it's interesting. You're right. There's a lot to unpack there.
right. And we re-sign or not re-sign, we signed some very good players. Like Kendall Fuller, the defensive back.
Yes.
He's top 10, top 15 in the
Yeah.
league,
Yeah,
right?
that was
Very
nice.
underrated player. 2 years, 16 mil. We sign a couple linebackers to very reasonable deals. Um, Guys with different strengths. We signed a center from Tennessee, who strictly from a run blocking perspective is very good. So why I bring that up is it made me feel like, okay, we're not just going all in on a quarterback who we may have paid like he's top five when he's
Mhm.
clearly not, to me, even top 10,
Right.
right? So my Tua take is this, and I'm going to bring up the Chiefs playoff game
Hmm.
a lot here because it provides such clear examples of the deficiencies that to me puts him more in the Minshew tier than
Right.
it does in the elite quarterback class.
Wow. Minshew.
Minshew. In fact, I would rather have Minshew for a
Whoa.
playoff game. For a cold playoff game, give me Minshew over Tua.
Okay, that's you're gonna make news with that. I hope everybody listening to that sees how bold that is.
I hope the world hears that.
Yeah.
I really do. And I'm not one of those guys who just genuinely dislike Tua and that's it. I've been closely watching him for a few years now. Tua, for his strengths, right? The strength of throwing with touch, throwing into areas with
Right.
with great timing.
Yes.
The accuracy over the middle
Yeah, yeah.
is great, right? I'm
Right.
not saying it's not.
And fits the system they're in
Perfectly
perfectly.
fits the system to a
Right.
point where it's not just like he has a great supporting cast. He
Mhm.
actually has a perfect
Right.
condition
Right.
for what his skill set is. Perfect, right? What does a quarterback of his skill set need? Guys who can separate and
Mhm.
guys with speed, guys who can
Yeah.
create with the ball in their hands, very fast break-esque.
Right.
The problem is in an AFC that's loaded with incredible quarterbacks and with incredible teams, you need one of two things. You need a quarterback that can win you games. Some player gets hurt. Your coach isn't that good, right? You've gotten a poor deck of cards at some point that year. That quarterback can win you important playoff games. Tua's not that guy, and it's clear. You look at the Chiefs game. Bradley Chubb was hurt, Jalen Phillips was hurt, Javon Holland was hurt. Three of our best defensive players. The offense was intact, and there was literally zero plays in that game where I felt comfortable with Tua at the helm. In fact, I may sound like a dick now. I was less concerned about winning than I was about Tua's health.
Right.
Tua was indecisive.
Hmm.
He was fidgety. He short-armed a few screens. There was not one throw where I was like, wow, that was an accurate pass.
Right.
The lack of arm strength came into play in the cold, in the wind. The frailness of, and look, the dislocated hip is not his fault. But at this point, Tua can't create off script. He can't extend plays, right? The point I'm trying to make is your quarterback has to be able to make two or three plays per game if you want to win playoff games that are purely based off of their skill, their greatness.
Right.
We'll
Especially if
win,
you're in the AFC.
right, and we'll win 10 or 11 games pretty religiously
Right.
with him. But
Right.
when you have to go to Cincy, when you have to go to KC
Right.
Baltimore, he's simply not your guy. There was a 4th and 2 when we were down, I believe, 16 before halftime.
Hmm.
Our defense, for as banged up as it was, and seriously, it was really banged up.
It
Like,
was.
I think
It
Van
was.
Ginkel was hurt too. Like, it was just
Yeah.
this insane thing. Our defense held us in that game. There's a 4th and 2. We have the ball at like the 47. Tua had a clear running, clear. Like, even with the deficiencies of lack of speed, lack
Hmm.
of fluid movement skills, he could have picked up that first. You could see he thought about it, but the fear, I think it's fear, made it so he tried to force a little button hook or a slant or a 5 yard in to a covered hill.
Hmm.
It's plays like that, man. I mean, it's not just that Chiefs game. It's the Titans game where they came back. They were down. We were up 14. They came back and won. It's various games where down the stretch, when you need to self-create, Tua can't. And so the point is actually less even about his deficiencies as it is pairing the deficiencies with you can't sell the farm to him.
Hmm.
If we re-signed him for a Minshew-like deal, I'd say great. Why? Because we would have had the cap space to re-sign Hunt and Wilkins and build out this San Francisco-esque. You have an average to good quarterback, but an
Hmm.
elite roster, like a
Right.
clearly
Right.
above the pack. And that's the second thing is as a team to compete, the ideal world, the clearest path and the most competitive you can be is having that guy at quarterback. But if you can't, get a guy on a rookie deal or on a Minshew type of deal,
Build out the rest.
build out the rest, especially if you have the existing infrastructure that the Finns still kind of have, but definitely had when they had Hunt and Wilkins and all of those players. I, if I was Greer and Dolphins fans would have wanted my head on a spike for it, I would have traded Tua. and probably sign Minshew. And people would go, whoa. I don't know. You look at the speed, you look at the skill. We have the best offensive mind in the sport. You're telling me Minshew couldn't have won 11 games? And go back and watch that playoff game. You would definitely rather have him at the helm than Tua. So at this point, and I know I've gone on a long rant here, what I propose, we trade Tua
Mhm.
to the Vikings or maybe the Raiders or the Broncos,
Mm.
right? We pick up a first round pick. We have the 21st pick, and at that point, we'd have we'd have the 11th, the 12th, or the 13th pick, right? One
Mhm.
of those three
Mhm.
teams. And you get a quarterback who's on a rookie deal for 5 years. With the infrastructure that we have, Greer could easily get a roster back to what it was last year, which was second to none to San Francisco in terms of skill,
Yeah. Yeah.
and continue the trajectory. Um, so
It's
that brings up the
fascinating.
quarterback class. But yeah,
Yeah. It's
yeah,
fascinating. I think you have put your finger on the franchise uh altering question in the salary cap era for the NFL.
yes,
It is, are you just keeping your fan base engaged, keeping the players engaged, um, winning 8, 9, 10 games a year, and
right.
you really are not going to win a Super Bowl? And or
Mm-hmm.
have you got the guy,
Yep.
and every year, and it's only like right now, it's only Mahomes, Allen, Herbert, and Burrow, who I put in that category where you can say day one of every season, we can win a Super Bowl because of this guy? Or is it the other model
Yeah.
in there, which you identified, which is a rookie deal,
Mm-hmm.
and that saves us the cap space to build out the rest of the team? And there's your San Francisco model
Yes,
and Jalen Hurts model until this
totally.
year in the extreme. Because Hurts was a second round pick and Purdy was
I
the
mean, they
last pick.
lucked they lucked out with Purdy.
Right. That's what saved them from having the Jets problem
Yes.
with Zach Wilson that they
Yep.
had with Trey Lance. Because you literally just traded Lance for Purdy,
Yep.
and you could cut Lance or trade him as they
Yep.
did and eat the huge cap hit and still have the money for Debo and Bosa and all the rest of them,
Yes. And
McCaffrey, you know.
to that point, I just have to throw this in. McDaniel came from the San
Yes.
Francisco
Right.
tree,
Right.
and the infrastructure is so similar that if there's one team that can copy and succeed with that mold, it's us.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's us. It's
Yeah.
unrealistic to think every team can get that guy,
Right.
right? It just, and especially if you're the Finns who are good enough to be in that every year 15th to 20th pick range,
Right.
but not top five,
Right.
you got to make your choice now. And
Yeah.
so let's talk some rookie quarterbacks
Yep.
and teams that we know are going to draft one. Bears, yes. Commanders,
100%.
yes. Patriots, yes.
100%. They traded their quarterback. So they're
Yep.
they're drafting quarterback. Top
That's
three.
that. So three quarterbacks off the board in the top three.
Yeah.
We know every year a team trades up into the top 10, right? It could be the Vikings. The Vikings we know are going to go after a player because, like we said, they have the 13th pick. They just traded to get back into the first round, trying to build that treasure chest to trade up. And the Giants at 6,
The
who
G-Man.
the G-men, you as the ultimate fan, right? you're pretty plugged into all sources in terms of what you read.
Yeah.
There's rumors that they're interested in McCarthy in a real way, right?
Yep. And he
It's
fits the Josh Allen sort of mold,
well,
with,
I did disagree with that, but with the legs,
yeah, maybe more. But I mean, it's hard because you're talking about a kid who
he's
didn't
more
get to.
Burrow.
Right, more Burrow is what I was going to say. He's more
Mhm.
Burrow, and but like even that's like it's hard to even say that because you're really projecting
Obviously, yeah,
because he did neither one he could not have the career with the kind of offense they ran in Michigan
right.
that any of those guys had in college.
No,
And you can't be sure with him.
right,
Unless you're Brian Dable or one of these gurus who, Sean Payton, they know it when they see it, and they can,
right,
Andy Reid walks down or goes down. Even Ben McAdoo went down to Texas Tech and saw Patrick Mahomes and was like, I can't wait to get my hands on this guy, you know.
right.
But I don't know that about JJ McCarthy, and I'm never gonna know. I'm a fan. I'm not, I
We won't
can't.
know.
No, you
Y-
won't know.
You you mentioned a GM or a scout got him into a room
Right.
and had him go through pre-snap reads.
Yes.
And you
I
talked about how special his X's and O's mind proved to be to that scout.
Right. Or GM. And
Yes.
that's something I heard, got to give credit on the Locked On Giants podcast with Patricia
Yep.
Traina, who is excellent, from a guy named Hondo Harrelson who does a podcast on the Raiders,
Hmm.
and said he heard this story. So, and what he said was he was in a room, or the GM, another either scout or GM, told him they had JJ McCarthy in the room, as you do for these interviews at the combine, and they gave
Right.
him an iPad, and they said, okay, here's like, 5 or 10 plays. Tell me what's going to happen. What's your pre-snap read? And on one of the plays, there was a safety who looked like he was blitzing. And what they said was, he said, okay, this guy's going to go back into coverage. And they said, how do you know that? He looks like he's blitzing. And he said, according to this report, look at his back foot. I
Yeah.
can tell by the way he's got his weight planted that
Yeah.
he's going to go back into coverage. Now, now it's one anecdote, it's one one guy telling one story, but if that's true and he can, get to that next level, that's the real next level. Where you hear from defensive linemen who are stud pass rushers all the time,
Mm-hmm.
that what they're constantly looking for is the offensive lineman's tells.
Yes.
Is he leaning back? It's a pass. Is he
Yep.
whatever? All those things.
For the
I
quarterback, it's the
remember,
same thing.
right. I remember hearing the Giants talk about an offensive lineman. If there's no blood in his fingers, it's because he's leaning down heavy, and that means he's going to go forward, which means it's a run. I mean,
Wow.
crazy. The guys who really have
Yeah.
that, ability to decode that,
Yeah.
that's the whole difference. I mean, I
Right.
heard Lawrence Taylor talk about how they always knew that when Joe Montana was gonna snap the ball, he would hunker down just an inch before the snap. He would hunch down. And that was how they knew it wasn't a hut, it was a hike.
Huh.
And now, can you imagine? Can you imagine like having that kind of, it's like, breaking the code in World War
Dude,
II,
yeah.
right?
At this level, this is what separates players,
Exactly. And so,
especially quarterbacks.
right. And Harbaugh says he's the number one guy in the class. Okay. Harbaugh was his coach,
Well,
all that.
Michigan, yeah, yeah.
Right. Of course. Right.
He
And
has to say
you
that.
kind of dismiss it. Right. You're like, he's the best quarterback in the class. Well, if he really can do that, and then, of course, do the other things, throw the ball as well as everybody, run, get you into the right protection,
Right.
he
Y-
could be the best quarterback in the class, or at
y-
least the fourth
Yeah.
quarterback in the class.
You're higher, I think, from what it sounds like on McCarthy than me.
Yeah.
My track record with quarterbacks has not been that great.
Right.
Um,
Although you had Anthony Richardson nailed last year. You did.
I did, yeah. It's funny, like I got Jackson right, I got Hurts right, and I got Richardson right. Besides that, I can't think off the top of my head, like, wow, I really like in the Herbert Tua class.
Yeah.
I had Tua neck and neck with Joe. So it goes to say that unless you're
Yeah.
in those
Yeah.
rooms where you can go through pre-snap reads and progressions 1 through 4, right? We really as fans, we don't know. What I can say is the level of competition that McCarthy faced. I know he played in the Big Ten, but look at the teams that he played. The only two that were great
Yep.
were Penn State and Ohio State. The rest of
Right.
the Big Ten last year was
Yep.
actually bad. Um,
Yeah.
like some American conference teams could have competed for fourth or fifth spots in the Big Ten last year. And
Right.
especially when you bring in the amount of talent that Michigan had up front,
Right.
obviously the best coach, a stacked defense. McCarthy was not, he wasn't really put to the test. Now, in the playoff games, McCarthy didn't make mistakes. He did what he had to do to win. And on the final drive against the Crimson Tide, McCarthy made a couple plays
Right.
that, like we just talked about with Tua, he won moments. He made plays, he extended plays
Yep.
to help Michigan win that game.
Yeah.
And he had an incredible, I don't know what the play was exactly, but he had an incredible, I think he was rolling left. He got cracked, massive hit, threw a dime off his back foot. And I was like, okay, yeah, he's probably a first round guy. Now, to weave it back into if the Dolphins were to trade Tua and get that first round pick, I think I would rather Penix or Nix
Mhm.
because these are guys that have overcame either poor situations,
Mhm.
overcame bad personal play, like
Yeah.
Nix, his
Right.
first few years was certainly not the same guy that he is now, right? Penix, obviously, I think he blew out the same knee, if I'm not mistaken, twice. It could have been two different knees, but I
Yeah.
mean,
It was
shit,
two ACLs.
he literally blew out two ACLs, came back, and he did this.
Right.
So that's point one. Also, I should say too, they lived in two completely different cul cultures. Penix went from the Midwest to a very liberal state, a very
Yeah. Sure.
totally different socioeconomic, religious, I mean, fully different world.
Interesting.
Nix does the same thing, but Nix goes from the deep south to the northwest. Nix comes from I don't want to get too personal, but Nix seems to come from your kind of
Sure.
conventionally southern household,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And both of these guys
Sure.
went up to the northwest and killed it.
That's a good
That
point.
matters to me, right?
Yeah.
Second off, their experience in schemes,
Hmm.
different schemes, different level of players, in
Yeah.
terms of weapons that they had, they went through all of those steps. Knicks has 57 starts, started 57 games. If you're the Finns and you trade Tua, what you need to make sure of, because most of the trade is to save cap, right? To go the San Francisco route, you need to make sure that you draft a guy who can come in from day one
Yeah.
with the
Yeah.
elite coach,
Yep.
the elite weapons, do enough
Yep.
to still win games, to let the talent shine through.
Absolutely.
I think Penix and Knicks can both do that. Penix is a little bit more comparable to Tua. In fact, Tua would be my comp for him, except Penix's arm is stronger. He just has more zip.
Yeah.
Tua threw for a ton of yards, for sure, but he still underthrew Hill often. They connected very well, both of them, crazy stats.
Hmm.
But it's funny because Tua left yards out there, and Hill, because of Tua, left yards out there. I think Penix, because of his arm, can actually even add a facet that we didn't have, and we save all of that cash. The argument for Knicks is the off-script plays, the extending plays with his legs.
Hmm.
Knicks is very Romo-esque
Hmm.
from that aspect.
Right.
Um, I also think Knicks's improvement shows that he can be coached. He's mature. I feel safer with Penix or Knicks. I'm torn between the two in terms of who I'd rather have. Probably Penix, if you're a team that has time to develop, which actually the Giants, the Vikings, they made this Tua deal, which they probably won't. The Finns, um, the Broncos, not many of those teams actually have time.
Right.
The Broncos more so with McCarthy, but it's an interesting it's an interesting debate though.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting because until I started to hear all this stuff about McCarthy, I was thinking Penix is number four. He's, in my mind, the highest ceiling of the second tier guys
Hmm.
and the lowest, but also the lowest floor because of the
Injuries.
injuries, the medical history.
Yep.
And now, then again, today, in today's world, an ACL is not what it used to be. You usually come back stronger with an ACL from an ACL.
Penix has.
Um, right. And so it's not necessarily as risky as it is. It's not like you could say he's had lots of hamstrings or lots of sprained ankles, high ankle sprains, because that is the kind of thing that scares you, because then you
Mhm.
say, it's soft tissue, it's something you can fix, a broken bone, an ACL, you know they're the doctors are, I mean, even an Achilles, which was death
Right.
in the old days, and
Death.
now they're amazing what they're doing. So anyway,
Right.
I feel like Penix has the highest upside, lowest ceiling of all the second tier guys, the three second tier guys. um I don't know. Knicks, I liked Knicks in college. My daughter's at Oregon. I watched
Right.
Oregon
Right.
games. I
Yeah.
loved watching him. I thought he was good.
Yep.
I heard, the Senior Bowl did not seem to go well for him.
No.
And so I'm thinking, McCarthy and Penix. And you're right, for Tua, like going back to where you started with, um, Tua, you've also got, like, your point about the Bears was that you got to keep the team engaged, right? This is a team that thinks it's pretty good. And you've got this dynamic offense. Tyreek Hill, he says, I'm not playing past 30. They're thinking they have a window now.
Yeah.
And Vic Fangio comes in, you think like, okay, we got injured last year. This year is going to be our year. You trade Tua, and all of a sudden that locker room might explode.
I I know we briefly talked about this before. I reflected on it. I think Tyreek genuinely likes Tua.
Mm-hmm.
Don't really think he's attached. I know for a fact, just intent. I mean, as intentfully as you watch Giants games, I watch the Finns. I know for a fact that Jalen is not a Tua fan. He says
Oh,
all the right things, but the body language, the faces he makes when Tua underthrows him, he's really frustrated. And obviously,
wow.
I don't have proof, but the point I'm trying to make is I don't think Hill is tied at the hip. I think Hill says all of the right things, and he's kind of like a Chad Johnson type of theatrical guy,
Mhm.
you're right. It would send ripples through the locker room, but I don't know to what extent because again, players are smart. Players read the same things we read. They actually think about the state of the team more because players want to win. And so there's been talks, obviously, about should the Dolphins extend him, to what extent. So it's not like it would be a random we're trading Tua, but it's a good point. It's a really good point, and I think it would take a very strong culture to bring in a rookie quarterback with the talent and expectations that we have. It would just be the right move. I can't emphasize enough how much of a mistake giving Tua the bag would be. Keep in mind, Pat, this is a fan base that's endured 20 years of complete averageness. 7 to 10 wins, mostly in the 7 to 8 range.
Right.
To endure another 5 to 10 years of that would actually be miserable. Like, I think as a fan base, if that happens, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I think I've proved my point. I don't want to seem like I hate Tua the person.
Right.
In fact, I
Right.
think he'd be a great hang. I think if he was your friend, you would be a better person
Oh
because you're
yeah.
friends with him. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
he's a resilient guy.
Yeah.
He's a guy of faith. He's a convicted person. I mean, he's definitely a guy you want on your team. Um, but I think the trauma has kind of seeped in from
Mm.
the rare hip, the fucking crazy hits to his head. I mean, that one
Right.
play where he gets up and his hands are like this. I mean, it's tough. And I
Yeah.
I, I hate saying these things, but if I was Greer, I'd say, man, unless I could draft like Veach, right? Give my quarterback the bag and then build a team off second and third round picks,
Right.
can't extend him.
It's fascinating. And it reminds me a little bit of what they're talking about on the Giants boards about Daniel Jones right now. Tua
Hmm.
certainly had a better career than Daniel Jones, but what they keep saying is forget that he might be better with a better line and he might be this and he might be that. The two neck injuries just make you say he's going to be traumatized, number one, so he won't play as well as he could.
Hmm.
And then number two, we got to go get another guy because we can't take the risk. And you're saying a little bit of that with the risk because Tua is never going to be good enough because of the fear, but also the stakes are higher in the AFC, like you're saying,
Totally.
because
Totally.
you've got Burrow, Herbert, Allen, and that guy in Kansas City. And so
Jackson
you
too.
and oh yes, yes, he's pretty good too. He's an
Yes,
MVP. He's an MVP,
sure.
and so now you're kind of saying, and I think this is it. This is the question for every franchise. Are you okay with just winning 9 or 10 games every year and maybe 11 games, but knowing that you're going to get bounced out of the playoffs by either Mahomes or Allen or Burrow and maybe Herbert in the future and Jackson,
The
or
answer should be emphatically no.
right. And then the risk you're taking is that let's just say it's Penix, okay, just because I like
Hmm.
Penix
Yeah, same.
and he all you can't help but think about the lefty sort of comparison with him and Tua. So
Definitely.
Penix comes in instead of Tua, and if it works, you're right. You have your chance for 5 years to get one of those Super Bowls in that 5 years because you can,
Penix is 24 too.
right.
Just saying.
Although you say to yourself, and then what if it doesn't work? Right? Nobody's going to blame you. Nobody except you is going to blame you for keeping Tua, paying him,
God,
a
your
little
job would
better than
be over. Greer would be
right.
fired like
Right. You're
like
done.
that.
You trade Tua, it all blows up. when you're on the brink, right? You're in that Kansas City game, and but for the injuries, you could have won that game.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you make one trade and risk it on Penix, and maybe it's a medical injury, and everybody says, you're a dope because that was obvious, or it just doesn't work out for a million reasons.
Well,
It's tough call for a guy who's,
yeah,
you're putting your job on the line.
what you're saying I think is very true, right? If Greer decided to trade Tua and draft Penix and it didn't work out, I mean, he's fired in a literal heartbeat. Like he's gone. The argument I would say though, right, is because you brought up there was a lot of injuries in the playoff game. It's been proven time and time again that Tua is just not a guy who can make those off script plays, right? He's not a guy who, if the conditions aren't perfect, can be the reason why you win playoff games. And with that being the case, why pay him like he is? Because it'll set the franchise back years. Why not take a swing purely in the name of saving cap? And I think because of how great of a coach you have in Mike and the speed, sure, it's a risk, but the odds that Penix completely falls flat, I would say are very low. And so you're doing it to save cap, you're doing it to build out in a San Francisco type way. And also, like I said, Penix has some upside that doesn't have.
Right. That's the key point. I mean, if you're convinced, it's interesting also to think about it from the general manager perspective versus an owner perspective. If you're the general
Good point.
manager,
Yeah,
you can think about it your way and say, look, I know that for the next 5 years, I'm not getting over the hump with Tua. I'm not, unless a freak thing happens, the rash of injuries on the top three teams. But when you're facing Baltimore, Kansas City, Buffalo, and the Bengals, and maybe the Chargers, every single year with those guys, one of them will take you down. That's
no
your
doubt about it.
thesis.
Yep.
And then versus the owner saying, look, I paid we structure the cap, we get there, we're going to win 10 games a year, we're going to make the playoffs every year, and I'm keeping my fan base engaged, I'm keeping my players engaged, and I don't risk 10 years of futility
Yeah.
because as an owner, you define futility as we're not going to make the playoffs, we have no hope, we lose the fans, we don't
And
lose our
Stephen
season
Ross is
tickets.
so sick of that. Stephen Ross for years the fans despised because of exactly that.
Right. It's interesting. It's Look, I don't know, man. I think I get what you're saying, and I think you're right about because that's what Spagnuolo did to Tua in that game was he
Oh
made
my
him uncomfortable. He wrecked the play and then said, make another one.
Spags, you're so right. Spags literally designed a game plan around exactly what we're saying. And Tua can't extend plays. He's frail. He's indecisive.
Wow.
Let's just pressure him. Shit, let's just pressure him. Let's bracket Hill and let's force him to make the off-script play. If
Yeah.
Tua could have made the off-script play, it's an exploitable scheme. It's an exploitable game plan. But
Yeah.
like you said, Spags knew it, dude. He knew
Yeah.
it.
It's
Uh,
it's there's your difference right there because that was my theory about the Super Bowl was San Francisco is going to play really well. They're going to in some ways dominate the game,
yeah,
but on those 3 or 4 plays that you
yeah.
have to have that will decide this game, Patrick Mahomes
Mahomes
will
has
make
it.
them and the Chiefs will win the game.
By the way, I would rather have Purdy.
Then Tua?
Yeah.
Wow.
Let me list quarterbacks I'd rather have to end this.
Okay. Really want to piss off Tua,
Yeah. Yep.
huh?
Purdy, Minshew,
Wow.
Rodgers, Stroud, and Stroud for next year, not Stroud like for the potential, but Stroud for next year. Daniel Jones equivalent.
Okay.
Equivalent. I'm telling you, man, I would Jones and Tua to me are like neck and neck. It's dumbfounding how people have Tua in their top 10 or their top five. Um, but the Minshew thing says it all, so I don't have to say more and
What about
completely
what
move
about
on.
what about Anthony Richardson?
Scheme matters.
Okay. Okay.
And I think if you have as special of a guy as AR-15, you design a scheme around him. But given how balls deep the Dolphins are in scheme and player fit,
Yeah.
I'd rather Tua. Um, but there's a lot of guys that can do what Tua can do.
Hmm.
The timing thing is real. The
Yeah.
fearlessness to go over the middle is real. That's
Yeah.
big. Tua can do that, and we would give some of that up if we got a Penix or Nix.
Hmm.
We'd also gain more in other facets of the game and save the cap. So that's the point
Yeah.
of my take. But yeah, for the next pod, uh, stay tuned for draft talk.
Nice.
Going to mock picks 1 through 10, going to talk about potential fantasy football steals,
Hmm.
right? Some third or fourth round running backs, some wideouts that you take in round 12, round 13 of your league. This guy can be big, reminiscent of a Tank Dell last year, or
Which
yeah,
you nailed it with Tank Dell last year. Absolutely.
yeah. Thanks. I love Tank. I loved and still love Tank. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Tank is great. So definitely stay tuned. Um, thank you, Pat,
Thank you.
for coming on, and cannot wait until our next one.
Looking forward to it.
All right, man. Peace.
All right, man. Be well.
See ya.